Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNate of BloodyElbow.com, joined once again by Conor Rubish and Zane Simon for the one, the only, the MMA Vivisection about UFC Fight Night, Stipe Miocic versus Mark Hunt, or UFC Fight Night Adelaide. Where the hell is Adelaide? Oh, it's in Australia. It's on Fight Pass Saturday night. General thoughts on the card, which set a new record for Don't Cares on the Care Don't Care preview.
My immediate thought on this card, once I started looking through it, was that it's no surprise the UFC brass are jumping on the Boxing is Dead bandwagon again, because they are not going to have a good time running this shitfest up against Canelo Kirkland.
It's very true. Zane, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a Fight Pass card in a foreign country, so I don't really expect a lot out of it. And I think it's going to be a morning card, actually. So
As with last time, I will say the last time we had a Fight Pass card, like that is the saving grace here. And
yeah,
I think we're probably coming up on a time in MMA fandom where we start viewing MMA the way boxing fans view boxing, where we're going to only tune in for the main card of a show like this and see like the 3 or 4 fights that are worth seeing. And if you have nothing else to do and you watch the undercard, you'll see some interesting prospects, like some good style matchups, even if the guys don't really have any relevance. But really, like, I don't know. I guess I can't really complain too much. It's a Fight Pass card. It's whatever. The main event is solid. I really like the main event.
yeah,
The
the,
main
the
event
top
is
two
mine.
fights are fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the third fight features Anthony Perosh. So, the hippo is the fiercest animal in Africa. So,
I love Anthony Perosh. He's
I do
bulletproof.
too. This guy's overperformed.
And Anthony Perosh's
Consistently.
skin makes up a third of his entire body weight. What are some other random hippo facts I know?
Another commonality with the hippo, but it is not a morning show. It's 7:45 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States. So,
Oh, is
Yeah.
it? I thought it
Yeah.
was okay. Well, then never mind. That
Yeah.
sucks.
I agree. They've trained, and it sucks because the Australian fans are having to watch it in the morning, and so that it can be on prime time on Fight Pass, which makes no sense. But I guess they've trained Australian fans. Hey, today you can start drinking at 8 a.m., and so the Australian fans are not going to look away from that. But let's dive into it, because one of the more intriguing fights, or at least more familiar fighters on the card, is right there in the very first fight: flyweight Alptekinos Kilik versus Ben Gwynn. Who wants this magic first? Connor, you're looking greedy.
This is one of the better fights on the undercard, to be honest. It's one of, in the tradition they seem to have picked up, of putting like a treat for the hardcore fans on the first fight of the night, since the hardcore fans are the only ones watching the first fight of the night. Oz Kilich, who did he fight recently? He lost a little shine.
But
Okay.
did he fight anybody since then?
Didn't he fight Moraga too?
I
my
don't
God.
think he fought Moraga. He fought Lineker, and before that he fought Smolka.
Smolka,
That's it.
that's right. That Smolka's the hard hitter.
Professional MMA analysts, everybody, introducing. Who is this? Oz Kilich, he lost a little shine. I know, like, he was pretty highly touted coming in, but I think he's still solid. And that always kind of happens where we just write a guy off if he doesn't impress as much as we expect him to. He's got a lot of potential, and he's probably got the style advantage over Nguyen. I think Nguyen is the guy who knocked out the dude with the tattoos and that like went viral. Am I
Yep.
thinking of the right guy?
That's the dude.
Who was like all cool and chill, smiling at the weigh-ins, knocked out his opponent. Nguyen's a good fighter. Obviously, he's got heavy hands. He's solid. I think, however, that Oz Kilich will probably have the wrestling and clinch advantage in this fight. Nguyen is really kind of just a striker, and so I like Oz Kilich to grind him out here.
And Zane, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this should be a pretty easy win for Oz Kilich, honestly. I think the Lineker loss was actually the fight where I really finally started to turn a corner on Oz Kilich, because I thought he was kind of overrated coming in. A lot of people were talking about, like, oh, he looks like a really good, fun talent, especially when he beat Uyenayama coming into the UFC. And then, Smolka beat him up, and that is kind of like that's not really that's a pretty bad loss. And he didn't really have a lot of striking, but he showed in that Lineker fight, even though he ended up getting knocked out late in the third, that he really, like, his boxing has turned a corner. He actually can stand in and land some shots and trade with somebody who hits really hard and is really consistent round after round. and he's still got a great wrestling base. And Wynn's just, we were talking a little bit about this before the show, but he's one of those fighters that just doesn't have a good process at all. He's been around for almost a decade now, weirdly. Like, he's really young, but he's been fighting since he was like 16. And it seems like one of those fighters who developed a bad style early and has ended up stuck with it, where he just throws, he punches himself out of range constantly, and then he's not a good wrestler or grappler. So he's always putting himself in danger, even while doing what he does best. And he's not so great at that he's gonna like blow a lot of people out of the water. So it should be a pretty easy win for us, Kilich.
And the odds makers agree. They've got him favored anywhere from minus 185 to minus 210. And Wynn is the underdog at plus 155 all the way up to plus 166. That brings us to Brendan O'Reilly and Vic Grujic at welterweight. Zane, you can go first on this gem.
This is a coin flip fight that I can't make myself care about at all. These guys are both kind of grinding, do everything okay, nothing really well. Fighters like from tough nations, was it? And I just, Brendan O'Reilly lost to Li Peng Zhang, and Vic Grujic lost to Chris Clements and Nordine Taleb, and so they both, I don't know, flip a coin. I guess I would take O'Reilly because I think Zhang is just a little better than Taleb and Clements, but maybe not much. I don't know. It's
You
a
were pretty
bad
high
fight.
on Chris Clements last week.
I like
Zane.
Clements a lot, but I do think that Zhang is a great athlete. Like, Zhang strikes me as one of those guys who is tough to match athletically, even if he's not if he's not greatly skilled. And so, I don't know. It's hard for me to take as much away from O'Reilly for that loss, and Grujic has just looked so slow and plodding. I don't know.
That's the real problem I see with Grujic. Like, he was substantially slower than the 40-year-old Chris Clements, who is not as slow as most 40-year-olds, but still, like, Grujic is just slow in comparison to everybody he fights, which is really rough for a welterweight who I don't think is particularly large. It's not like he's a big, slow, plodding, who's the slowest guy in the UFC?
Cathal Pendred.
Yeah, he's not Cathal Pendred, but he's still quite slow. And O'Reilly kind of possesses the same skills as Clements, not the wild parts, but in terms of like good heavy hands, like decent enough wrestling, not amazing, but yeah, this fight sucks. I think O'Reilly's gonna win.
I
We
think,
shouldn't even talk about this anymore. It sucks. It's a bad fight.
It's over. And the odds makers, they like Grujic, but can't quite decide. They've also got O'Reilly in the negative. So Vic is at minus 112 all the way up to minus 145, and O'Reilly is at minus 102 all the way, plus 115 all the way up to minus 102. And that brings us to Alex Chambers and Kaylin Curran in a women's strawweight bout. Connor, you can go first.
I like Kaylin Curran a lot. I think she's pretty damn good, and that's why I really was not. I think all the people who were expecting Paige Van Zandt to lose to Felice Herrig were underrating Kaylin Curran, because for Van Zandt to have done to Curran what she did is pretty impressive to me. Kaylin Curran's very well-rounded. She's strong. She's got good wrestling, relatively good clinch fighting. She's closer to what men's MMA is right now for the women's strawweight division. She's got those skills. She's got the right metagame. Chambers is solid. I think the fact that she was submitted by Aisling Daly in her last fight is just kind of a point about. It just makes a point about where she is in her career. She's not ready for somebody like Kaylin Curran. Daly is pretty much going to go forward as the fighter who submits people who are not ready for people who are better than Daly. That's basically it. She's a gatekeeper, and Curran, I think, is a legit top 15 strawweight. So I've got to go with Curran.
All right, and Zane, your take?
Yeah, I agree. Curran. I think the thing with Curran Van Zandt matchup was that Van Zandt is good at the exact same things that Curran was, but Van Zandt's a better athlete. And Curran is still a very good athlete and a very good process-oriented fighter, but she's just maybe not quite that top 5. I mean, Van Zant's really an elite athlete for the division. And Chambers is small, even at 115. She's small for her division, and as a karate striker, especially, she doesn't have a lot of volume in her output, and so being a low volume, undersized striker in your division really puts you at a disadvantage, especially against bigger women who are going to have a grinding and like reasonably process heavy game of, getting somebody into the cage, landing lots of shots in the clinch, stuff like that Curran does really well. So I got to take Curran here.
All right, and the odds makers agree. They've got Curran pretty heavily favored, minus 206 all the way up to minus 225. Alex Chambers is the underdog at plus 175 all the way up to plus 191. And that brings us to Brad Scott and Dylan Andrews in a middleweight matchup. And Zane, you can go first.
This is another fight that's just not good. Not good at all. Man, both of these fighters have so many problems. Like, Brad Scott, both of them are actually kind of pretty big, strong guys. Even at, Brad Scott, I think, people don't see that as much because he went all the way down to welterweight for a bit, but he's a 6'1", legit, pretty big middleweight. But he's really not a very good athlete. He doesn't have any dynamic offense. He's a guy who needs to be bigger and stronger than his opposition to really outmuscle them and grind them down. And Andrews is a good athlete and is very big for the division and is very strong, but he has some of the worst process of any fighter. Just like, him knocking himself out against Sam Alvey is like the ultimate Dylan Andrews fight. And, that kind of sucks. I don't know. I'm going to take Andrews because this is, like I say, Scott doesn't have the tools that should really trouble him, but neither did Alvey. And so, this is not a fight that you should be putting any kind of stock into or anything. It's just a bad fight.
Connor, if you were Reebok, how much would you give these guys?
Don't ask me that.
Just kidding. Go ahead.
If I were Reebok, then very little. But that was a slight on Reebok, not these fighters.
Yeah.
You put me in a tough spot, Nate. You put me in a tough spot.
Reebok will give everybody nothing. Free socks.
Free socks, but like the kind that go to Gabriel Brothers, like they have some stitching defects.
Yeah, that's right.
Not the less than good socks. Dylan Andrews? I agree with everything Zane said. I think that Scott just is going to struggle with somebody who's as big as him. Dylan Andrews is like a guy who has the potential to beat a lot of really good fighters, but just has like this bizarre thing going on where, and I never really identified it as anything tangible, but I think Zane's right. There's just not really any kind of, what Zane calls process, I call strategy. Like, there's no strategic approach to what Andrews does at any point. So, like, he'll be completely winning a fight and dominating, and then just, like, he's the guy who will, like, jump on a guillotine when he's dominating a fight, you know what I mean, and fall to his back. Or the guy who will, like, fling himself off balance with a punch and get his back taken. It's just, like, random. It's chaos. Dylan Andrews' style is chaos, and that means he's dangerous, but it also means he's never a guy to count on. You should never ever count on Dylan Andrews winning. So I'm going to pick him, but unless you are playing like a free counter move game and he's priced well, do not stake any kind of money on Dylan Andrews here. It's not a fight to bet on.
All right, and the odds makers, they like Brad Scott. Although both guys are in negative territory, they've got Brad Scott at plus 100 all the way up to minus 120. They've got Dylan Andrews at minus 102 all the way up to minus 130. And that brings us to Beck Rawlings and Lisa Ellis, also a women's strawweight bout. And Connor, you can go first.
Beck Rawlings is good. I guess I'll take this moment to point out to everybody that Beck Rawlings is not as good as you desperately want her to be. Like, she's like a media darling and everything, you know what I mean? Like she's all over social media, everybody loves her, probably because she like takes pictures of herself in bathing suits all day. And that's cool, I guess, but she's not like an amazing top level strawweight. She's solid. She's kind of in like the Felice Herrig position where she's, and I guess she's very similar to Felice Herrig in that respect. Felice Herrig, everybody, you know, she's well known, she's promoted herself well, but is she really an amazing fighter? Not really. She's still probably better than Lisa Ellis. Ellis is, Ellis is like, they got an interesting crop on the Tough 20 because they brought in like quite a few fighters who are solid, like fighters like Aisling Daly and Lisa Ellis who are veterans and really tricky, but are not necessarily going to keep improving at any point. Whereas Rawlings still has the potential to improve, and she's still just younger and more athletic than Ellis. And I think Rawlings likes fighting, and I don't really get the sense that Lisa Ellis loves it anymore. She's not like Sam Alvey, where even though it's just inexplicable that she's still succeeding, like she's having a great time doing it. So you're like, okay, well that's in her favor. For Lisa Ellis, it's kind of just like she's just cashing her paychecks every once in a while. So I've got to go with Beck Rawlings.
All right, and Zane, your take?
Yeah, I agree with all that. Beck Rawlings, Felice Herrig, Aisling Daly, they're all kind of in this crop of like probable gatekeepers where they're very decent fighters, but the athletic limitations are going to keep them from being really great fighters.
Mm-hmm.
But Ellis, yeah, I mean, it's tough to. I mean, Ellis has a win over Aisling Daly, but that was 5 years ago now, so I don't think there's a lot to take away from that. And it's just, yeah, Rawlings should win this fight. She's really aggressive. She's really consistent in her aggression. Like I say, she's actually a very good process fighter in terms of what she does and how she fights. She's very, like, get the takedown, ground and pound, box on the feet, always back to the same stuff over and over again. Ellis is not that fighter, so Rawlings this should be her fight to win.
And the odds makers agree. They've got Rawlings favored at minus 162 all the way up to minus 180, and Ellis is the underdog at plus 135 all the way up to plus 149. And that brings us to Daniel Kelly. And speak of the devil, smiling Sam Alvey. This is a middleweight fight. Connor.
You want to know how irrelevant this card is? We've mentioned Sam Alvey twice before even talking about his fight.
That's how much anticipation we had for this fight. And just wait till we get to the hippo.
On the card before talking about it. Like, we've been talking about him, and I'm like, oh, there's Sam Alvey right there.
What a treat. What a treat we are in for Saturday when we get some unexpected Sam Alvey. It's like finding money on the ground. Hey, it's Sam Alvey in the octagon.
I like Sam Alvey.
I did too. He's fun as shit.
Yeah, but Sam Alvey is like
It's like a $20 bill on the ground you didn't know you had, you know?
Sam Alvey is like the Andy Lee of MMA, where you're like, he should not be competing at this level, but he's just like knocking out guys who are supposed to beat him. It's just weird. Like, he appears to have tremendous power in his punches too. It's very strange. Just like Andy Lee. Like, I don't know. Daniel Kelly is like, Daniel Kelly to me, was Daniel Kelly on The Ultimate Fighter?
He was Tough Nations, yeah.
Okay, because otherwise this would have sounded insane when I said that Daniel Kelly sums up the last like 10 seasons of The Ultimate Fighter in my head. Like, Daniel Kelly to me is like the quintessential modern Ultimate Fighter, where it's just like he's like slightly too old and like slightly, he's athletic but like not very good. Like, I just don't care about him. I watch his whole fight and I'm like, I care about him less after 15 minutes of his cage time than I did beforehand. I don't know. I guess that's pretty harsh. Sorry, Daniel Kelly. I don't mean to rag on you. I just, like, this is the UFC, man. I want to see some good fighters. I'm going to pick Sam Alvey. I want Alvey to win. I think he's going to knock Daniel Kelly out. Why the hell not?
And Zane, do you agree?
I gotta take Daniel Kelly, actually, weirdly. Like, I was really down on him coming in. And he reminds me a lot of Cathal Pendred. Like, that's a very easy comparison here, where he's like slow as shit, big and lumbering, doesn't look technical anywhere, But then you actually see him in the cage against somebody, and you realize how much bigger and thicker and stronger he is than a lot of guys, and how like consistently grinding his style is, and how much random power he gets on stuff, even when he's not like throwing it technically or doing it well. And he seems a lot harder. Like he's just a really tough guy to beat. Like he's that kind of brick wall that every fighter is going to look bad against, win or lose. And I don't think that. I mean, Alvey could be the fighter to knock him out, and I wouldn't be surprised if Alvey did, because he's got like that weird, just for everything, like, all the weird ways that Dylan Andrews can lose are all the weird ways that Sam Alvey can win.
Yeah.
But I got to take Kelly here. I just think that he's just one of those ugly fighters that is always tough to fight and nobody looks good against.
I will say, I have to give Daniel Kelly credit, because his fight with Patrick Walsh may have been one of the best times I've had on Twitter discussing MMA with MMA fans, because it was such a horrible fight.
I think I had described that fight as two looking like they'd both been tied to shopping carts and were being pushed together randomly.
While also being attacked by bees, like, just randomly flailing.
And that's like guys like Cathal Pendred and James Vick, who's up on this card too, and Dan Kelly, like they all end up in those kind of fights where you're just like, they're just big and tough and their fights are ugly as shit.
If you saw it in a parking lot, you'd be thrilled. In the
Yeah.
octagon, not so impressive. And oddsmakers, though, if you listen to Zane, this might be one to sneak in on if you go for the venal sin of gambling, because Daniel Kelly is a big underdog at plus 270 all the way up to plus 348. Sam Alvey is a heavy favorite at minus 370 all the way up to minus 420.
What was Kelly at?
420. What? Huh?
What was Kelly at? What were his odds?
Kelly was in the plus 300s, plus 280, 270 is the lowest, plus 348, is up there. So this might be the steal, might be the one to put Grandma's Social Security check on. So who needs to eat this month, It was time to tighten the belt. Anyway, Granny, we had to do it. All right, that brings us to welterweights. Kyle Noak, How the Mighty Have Fallen, versus Jonathan Webb. Who wants this one first? So I see everybody chomping at the bit.
I'll go it. I'm going Jonathan Webb all the way. This is a great introductory fight to the UFC for him, because people know who Kyle Noak is. They expect Kyle Noak to probably win this fight, a lot of them. I'm actually, and Jonathan Webb, like, he's a really great wrestle-grappler. He's got a good, consistent power takedown game, shoots a nice double. It's not a complicated wrestling game, but against Noak, it doesn't have to be. I mean, Patrick Cote was handling Noak with his wrestling easily, and Patrick Cote's wrestling game is not like, that's not what you play Patrick Cote on UFC fighting games for. Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
And Webb's got a really, really great, consistent grappling game. He stays on guys, he dominates position, and he aggressively hunts for submissions. His striking's still not there yet, but it's good enough. He uses it well to time his entries, so it should be a good win for Jonathan Webb.
And Connor, do you agree?
Yeah, I got nothing more to add. Zane's spot on. Should be a dominant win for Webb.
Man, sad days for those of us who remember the glory of Kyle Noak. When it was a brief one, but it was there. And pretty even odds. They've got Webb at minus 102 all the way up to minus 125, and Noak also in negative territory at minus 105 all the way up to minus 120. I'm not even sure who's favored there. Such a split. And that brings us to featherweights. Hatsu Hioki versus Daniel Hooker. Hioki has lost 4 UFC fights, but he could have won 2 of those if the judges weren't American judges. So, anybody going to give me any hope as a desperate fan of Japanese MMA, Connor?
We talked about, if you're a Japanese MMA fan, you better just go for Horiguchi as the hope of the future, because
we just watched him lose a title fight.
Well, he lost to Mighty Mouse, man. I can't fault him for that.
Dreams are over. We wanted the gold, Connor.
I mean, Hatsu Hioki is not going to give you any more hope than Horiguchi will. That being said, he should win this fight. Hioki, like, we talked about process and strategy how many times in this card already? That's always Hioki's problem. Like, just like the problem with a lot of female mixed martial artists in the UFC right now, like a lot of the ladies are just like, I'm winning, I'm gonna go for a head arm throw, like, you know what I mean, or like a sacrifice throw when I'm ahead. Like, what are you doing? Just do something that's low risk. Do something that makes sense. That's Hioki. Like, he's content to play guard, and he's got a good guard, but like that doesn't really fly anymore in the UFC. There's very few submissions from guard in the modern UFC, in modern MMA in general. Daniel Hooker is. I'm trying to read Zane's mercurial facial expression right now. I don't know. He beat Ian Entwistle really impressively, but then it's so hard to get any read on somebody who fought Maximo Blanco, who is capable of incredible feats of athletic brilliance and also just absolute stinkers. So. But I don't know. Daniel Hooker, he doesn't have the skill set to deal with Hioki. Hioki's last win was pretty solid. Maybe he's learned from it. I think Hioki's probably just going to keep losing fights and disappointing people, but this should not be one of those fights.
And Zane?
Yeah, I gotta go with Hioki here, even though I long ago just said that I am never going to put any faith in Hioki. When people, after his loss to Ricardo Lamas or Clay Guida, I think it was, and people were like, oh, he got robbed, and I can't believe that. I'm like, yeah, I'm not betting on Hioki at all. Like, he's just not the fighter that's going to take fights in the UFC. But the big thing to take away from Hooker's last two performances are really the physical aspect. Ian Entwistle is a really small featherweight. He dropped to bantamweight, and so Hooker was able to match him skill for skill and physicality for physicality, and Entwistle's terrible process fighting is really put him in trouble for that fight. Like, just diving on a leg and clinging to it until you either get it or you get knocked out is not going to win you every fight. And then against Maximo Blanco, what we saw was just that he can't compete physically. Like, he would he would be winning the fight boxing at range or something like that, and then he'd go in for the clinch to try and tie Blanco up, and Blanco would just shove him off and, hit him and throw him to the ground and do that over and over again. He just didn't have the physical tools to match Maximo Blanco. Hioki's not Maximo Blanco in that respect, but I think he's technical enough. He's more technical than Hooker everywhere, and the fact that Hooker's not a great physical fighter means that it's going to be a battle of technique. So at that point, I do have to give it to Hioki, although I wouldn't trust it. I wouldn't put money on Hioki.
Well, the odds makers are begging for it because they've got Hioki heavily favored. He's favored minus 285 all the way up to minus 325, and Hooker is the underdog at plus 215 all the way up to plus 257. And that brings us to the four-fight main card on Fight Pass, starting with Jake Matthews and James Vick in a lightweight tilt. Zane, tell us about it.
This, I hate to see prospects I like fight James Vick. I really do, because as we discussed with Dan Kelly, Vick is just one of those fighters that's going to make you look bad. He's tough as hell. He's a really high output striker, and he will just stand in and trade and go for broke all the time. Now, the big thing that I think makes me pick Matthews here throughout all that was Vick's fight against Nick Hine, where it looked like Vick really tried to take his foot off the gas and be a more controlled, patient fighter, and he almost lost a fight. I thought he did lose a fight that he would have handled had he just stayed consistent and aggressive. And if he's really trying to be a more careful fighter, I don't think he has the technical skill to do that at all. And Jake Matthews is really like a blue chip prospect. He's really a guy with a lot of physical skill and a lot of developing tools. He's not the greatest striker yet, but he's a good wrestler and a good grappler, and he's a decent striker, and he's got power and dynamic offense. And I think that he's got more. He has the chance to do the same things that Hine did, but with more consistency and more athletic power. And at that point, I got to take him to win that fight. So I'm going with Matthews, but it really is kind of dependent on James Vick keeping this, try and fight on the outside and be a range striker thing that he's really not good at.
So Zane,
Connor?
do you think if Vick goes with his older style that he will win this?
I think there's a very good chance. I think that if he just decides to trust his chin and swing away, then he can make this a sloppy brawl that he takes.
Yeah, I kind of have the same feeling. Vick and, man, I hate to say it, but like James Vick and Ron Stallings are like flying the Lloyd Irvin flag and doing a good job of it. Like, it's pretty hard to pick against either of these guys. And, as much as I hate their affiliation, they're both really solid fighters. James Vick is so tricky, man. He's like, you have to say, you cannot look at James Vick's record and say that he hasn't exceeded expectations by far. I mean, Ramsey Nijem, Valmar Lazaro, and Nick Hine, those are three very solid wins, and I think he was probably an underdog in all of them. Like, he's, just nobody expects him to win, and now he's finally getting the credit he deserves, but he's fighting probably the guy with the most potential of that group. And I agree. I think that Jake Matthews is like Nick Hine, but younger and more dynamic. And considering how close that fight with Hine was, it's logical to me to assume that Vick will come into it with the same game plan, with a very similar approach. And if he does, I don't think it'll work. So I have to go with Matthews too, but it really depends on which Vick shows up. I really agree with Zane, and he's just damnably tricky. Like, he can bedevil anybody on the right day of the week. So a tentative pick for Jake Matthews.
And the odds makers are also picking Matthews, but not by a big margin. They've got him at minus 170 all the way up to minus 185. And Vick is the dog at plus 140 all the way up to plus 158. And that brings us to the fight we've been waiting for. Anthony the Hippo Perosh versus Sean O'Connell. Oh my God. Light heavyweight action. Zane, you can go first.
Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but Anthony Perosh, I got to take him.
Because he grabs you and he drags you in the water with these giant fangs, even though he's an herbivore.
Anthony Perosh will make his ring walk underwater, moving at 30 miles an hour. He runs on the bottom of a lake to the octagon at 30 miles an hour. He's fearsome.
And I think O'Connell could throw him off if he comes in armed with one of those giant toothbrushes. Like, that could, maybe like trigger Anthony Perosh to just kind of sit there with his mouth open going like that, and just kind of like... He's
been there in the zoo before. And
O'Connell will come in like with a crew of like Egyptian princes and nobility and prepare for one of the great hippo hunts of old. It's not going to work.
No, but O'Connell is the exact kind of he loves to brawl and grapple, and he has no wrestling in between, and he's not a great brawler or a great grappler. So he seems like exactly the kind of fighter that's going to run at Perosh, get dragged to the ground, and get choked out.
Yeah, like this fight goes two ways. O'Connell just knocks Perosh's 42-year-old head off on the way in because Perosh has virtually no defense, or Perosh lands a 1-2, clinches, and drags him down, rinse and repeat, and quite possibly submits him. Like, for all of the irony behind our praise of Anthony Perosh, he's a tough fighter. Like, it's kind of insane that 42-year-old Anthony the Hippo Perosh is a top light heavyweight right now, but he's very tough and crafty, and I love it. And I'm never ever going to pick against Anthony Perosh ever again.
We've all been there. We've learned our lessons. Anthony Perosh is favored minus 140 all the way up to minus 190. Sean O'Connell is the underdog at plus 120 all the way up to plus 150. That brings us to the co-main event, Brad Tavares versus Robert Whittaker in middleweight action. Connor, you go first.
It's a tough one. It's a tough fight to call. I really, really did not expect Robert Whittaker to do to Clint Hester what he did. I don't know why I had this idea of him as a normal-sized welterweight, but he did not look outsized by the massive Clint Hester. And he certainly had enough power to deal with Hester, and he was also significantly faster. So I think the move to middleweight may have been a really good move for him, and hopefully it inspires some other fighters who are just desperately trying to gain size and strength advantages in their various divisions to fight at their natural weights, because Whittaker clearly is suited for middleweight. And I hope to see some good action out of him there. Brad Tavares is probably not the guy to keep his middleweight run going strong, though. Like, Yeah, Brad Tavares lost to Yoel Romero, and he lost a shocking upset to Tim Boach in a comeback. But like he's still just this really consistent fighter, and I think that's the thing I think of him. As much as we talk about guys who have no process in this card, Brad Tavares has a process. It's like one process for every fight, and it always works. He can struggle sometimes with low output. That's kind of the one flaw in the way he approaches fights, but he seems to have shored that up a little bit lately. He's thrown a few more combination punches, put those kicks together, and his wrestling is like it's still underrated. You still don't expect his takedowns to be as good as they are. You still don't expect his takedown defense to be as good as it is. I kind of see Brad Tavares just taking down Whitaker a lot. Like Whitaker has good takedown defense, but Tavares is big and strong. He's certainly a better wrestler than, I mean, who else has Whitaker faced? He's a better wrestler than Court McGee or Colton Smith. That's for damn sure. And so I think Brad Tavares. But like the thing is I wouldn't be utterly shocked if Robert Whitaker came in here and outboxed Tavares and moved around him and kept that stiff jab in his face, hit him with some left hooks and hurt him. We've seen now that Tavares can be hurt. He's looked unimpressive in a lot of fights. Even if he's consistent, he's often not, mind-blowing in his performance. So I'm going with Tavares, but I'm pretty interested in this one. I think it should be a good fight.
And Zane?
I'm gonna take a chance on Whitaker, and I think the biggest reason that I'm gonna do that is that Brad Tavares isn't a finisher. Like, he doesn't finish fights at all.
Yeah.
Which means, and he's not the kind of guy who's really gonna grind on somebody. He's not like he does have a consistent game, and he has worked on his output and stuff like that. But he's not like a really positionally dominant fighter where he's gonna like take you down and ride you out or hold you against the fence and really work you over round after round. Like, he likes to create space and work from range a bit, and I think he's just gonna give Whitaker too much to work with too often. Like, he's just gonna be too. He's gonna allow him space too often. Now, if he fights this fight like he did against Lorenz Larkin, which was really just a dominant performance from Tavares and a really controlling performance, that's like the crown jewel of Brad Tavares' career right now, then he can win. But I think he really needs that kind of consistent dominance, and I'm not sure I trust him to have that. So I'm going to take the chance on Robert Whitaker to be able to hurt Tavares a couple of times and make this fight interesting and squeak it out. But I think it's going to be really close.
I see this one as being pretty similar to the Court McGee fight for Whitaker, where I think Tavares is a better version of McGee. He doesn't have McGee's ridiculous output, but like in what they want to do in their fights, they're pretty similar. This kind of slow building pressure, the awkward but effective wrestling attack, combinations, attacking high and low. Tavares does all of that really well. And like I said, I think Tavares is a bigger and better version of McGee. And I really, like, my pick for Tavares is really banking on the fact that he will come in with the kind of approach he took to Lorenz Larkin. I don't think there's any reason to expect we'll see a Tavares who's willing to strike with a guy whose only chance really is the striking. So, yeah. It's a tough call. Whitaker's solid, man. He really impressed me in his last fight, but I have to pick Tavares.
All right, and the odds makers like Tavares as well. They've got him favored at -147 all the way up to -190. Whitaker is the dog at +125 all the way up to +150. But if you believe Zane Simon, and we do call him that fucking idiot for a reason, this is the one to drop the family fortune on right here. This could be the big one. And that brings us to the actual big one. Mark Hunt, Stipe Miocic in. I can't believe this isn't on a UFC pay-per-view, but I guess the Australian fans need something to sell them a ticket. So who wants to talk about this? This is the actual good fight on the card. Zane?
Yeah, this is I'm going to make a prediction that's going to make me sad, but I'm going to make it, and that's going to be the end of it. Stipe Miocic is going to win, and he's very likely going to knock Mark Hunt out, and everybody's going to feel really bad about it. There's a chance that that Hunt will be much better prepared than he was last time out. Like, he should be, because that was a short notice call-up for a pretty major fight at altitude in Mexico City in highly polluted air that he hadn't been training for. But I think Mark Hunt is just not quite the Mark Hunt that he used to be, and that's really the two-speed Mark Hunt, the Mark Hunt that can set you up slowly with just like careful little, pitter-pat boxing, and then come in with something really hard and powerful to just shock you and really put you out. I think he's not much more now. Like, he's still got the process, but it's like he's throwing the big shots or he's not landing anything. And I think Miocic is just too athletic and too aware at this point to really get involved in that kind of fight and get hit often enough. I just don't see it. I think Miocic is going to come out and make this look easier than a lot of people want it to be.
Zane, you're making me sad because
I know.
you're talking a frightening amount of sense there. Connor, bring us back to the dream. Mark Hunt.
Yeah, it's really tough for me to get a firm grasp on where Mark Hunt really is at, because I see reasons for saying that he's having a long overdue physical decline now, finally at the age of 41 after, how long has this guy been fighting? He's been taking shots to the head. He was a K1 champion in 2001, and he's been fighting longer than that. I want to say since like 98. So it's insane how long this guy's been doing it, and he started kind of late too. I don't know. Like, Mark Hunt really impressed me in his fight with Roy Nelson. I thought he looked fantastic in that fight, and people were freaking out because Nelson kind of landed some right hands. That's just not giving Roy Nelson enough credit. Like, the guy is very crafty at landing the right hand. I realize he has had a lot of bad style matchups. The Stipe Miocic one in particular, he made him look horrible, but there's a reason he's knocked out so many fighters with the right hand, despite basically having nothing else in his toolkit, and it's because he's good at it. And against a guy who doesn't have foot speed like Mark Hunt, he's going to be in the danger zone a little bit. Did he adapt to it beautifully and then end up knocking Roy Nelson out with his tremendous punching power? Hell yeah, he did. So, that's, to me, I didn't expect Mark Hunt to completely avoid the right hand in the first place, and he adapted to it very well. So it shows me that Mark Hunt is still a very smart fighter. He's still thinking. He's still trying to make changes and adjustments. Granted, one of those changes and adjustments got him knocked out when he fought Fabricio Verdum, ducked into a knee that he thought was a takedown. But, I don't think Mark Hunt has lost it yet. I don't. This will be the fight to convince me that he has, if he really loses here, if he loses badly. Because
you're saying you don't view Stipe as a real prospect for the heavyweight title?
No, I do. I really do. But I'm just saying, like, Mark Hunt is, to me, like a top 5 UFC heavyweight. So this will be, depending on how he looks here, it could be the one that cements, the idea that Mark Hunt is declining. I do think Stipe Miocic is a hell of a fighter. I think he is very, very diverse. How long has Stipe been fighting? I'm going to find out quickly. His first pro fight was in 2010. So he's pretty young in his career still, and I think he's still improving. He's got really good boxing, honestly, some of the best boxing in MMA, certainly probably the best, most well-rounded boxing in the heavyweight division.
Better than Junior Dos Santos.
Yeah, I think so. I think Dos Santos, especially after Dos Santos lost his speed. I realized Dos Santos beat Miocic, and he beat him convincingly. But it was like a knockdown, drag-out war, and that's the one thing Dos Santos has more than anyone else in the division, is the ability to take a beating and never, ever stop, lie down, and accept defeat. I do think Miocic is a better boxer than him. I think Junior Dos Santos has lost a step. I think he's like packing on muscle and trying to be this big power puncher, and I think his speed was always his best advantage. I think the Junior Dos Santos who fought Miocic, maybe not today's version of Mark Hunt, but had he been matched up against Mark Hunt in this current shape back when he would have lost. Mark Hunt would have knocked him out because it was already a tight fight. Oh, God damn it. I'm going to pick... I'm going to pick Stipe Miocic.
Man.
I know, it sucks. I don't want to. Nah, fuck it. I'm picking Mark Hunt.
All right, that's more like it. That's more like it. Bet the house on him, too, because he's an underdog. Plus 177 up to plus 290. If you bet everything on Mark Hunt, you'd win big.
You're being played off, Zane.
I will say this. I think Miocic lets himself get hit a lot more,
That's
and that's partially because he's a really high output fighter. Like that tends to get you hit, but that could be something that he can't afford if Mark Hunt can keep himself from getting hurt.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking is like I recall Miocic being countered by that left hook in the Junior Dos Santos fight. I recall Miocic being hit with like 3 punches in a row when he fought Shane Del Rosario. I recall Miocic always just having to kind of turn off his offense when he wants to have defense, or else turn off his
Yeah.
defense when he wants to have offense. He's kind of an either-or fighter at this point. And with a guy who's only 5 years into his pro career, who's like basically an MMA neophyte still, I think we could see that change still. We could see him start to improve that. So that's why it's really hard to pick against him. But if he comes in the same Stipe, I think Mark Hunt has windows of opportunity. I don't think Miocic hits harder than most of the guys Mark Hunt has faced, certainly not harder than Roy Nelson. So whatever, I'm picking Mark Hunt. I think I'll knock him out.
All right, and that's why Stipe is the underdog at favorite at -210, all the way up to -240. So it pains me, but I got to pick Stipe too. Mark Hunt is old. He's had a lot of wars. He's slowing down. I do think stylistically, if Mark Hunt was at his peak, that he would present big trouble for Stipe because he's crafty. He sets up punches. He changes during the fights. He could catch him with a counter coming in. But if he's old and slow and doesn't have his chin anymore, then it's all Stipe. But I'll be rooting for Mark Hunt all the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, any final thoughts on the card? Is this how we spend our Saturday nights? Yes. This is how we spend our Saturday nights.
Everybody watching this, now that you've given us your hard-earned dollar by contributing to our YouTube views, make sure you watch Canelo Kirkland on Saturday instead of this, because it's a much better, more compelling fight, and it will convince you, if you're one of that crowd, that boxing is not, in fact, dead. I do have some betting picks, Nate. Zane, go.
I would say if you have Fight Pass, you can watch this the next day. It's automatically DVR'd for you. So.
Yes.
Yep. So no reason not to watch Canelo. But Canelo didn't hurt Mayweather when he had his chance, Connor.
Canelo didn't brawl Mayweather, which, just like people expecting Pacquiao to brawl Mayweather, was really the fans deluding themselves, not Canelo dropping the ball. The man is a boxer-puncher. He's not a brawler. I don't care that he was bigger than Mayweather. He was always going to try to box Mayweather and land big punches at range. That's his game. And he'll be able to do it against James Kirkland, mark my words.
I see. I just wanted him to hurt Mayweather once. I just wanted to see him stumble so we'd have a video highlight and then we could. But as it is, it seems like Mayweather's going to take all the shine and just.
He wasn't ready. Mayweather took that fight against a young Canelo. In a year from now, Canelo would have given the same Mayweather a stiffer test, I think.
Yeah, but that's why Floyd Mayweather's going out undefeated, probably, because he picks his fights. Times his opponents very, very carefully. So, yeah, I got to go. And that fight is on Showtime or on pay-per-view?
Not pay-per-view.
It's not pay-per-view. Is it Showtime or HBO?
I thought Canelo was on Showtime because he fought Mayweather on the Showtime pay-per-view package.
He may have come back. I really feel like I should know this.
Yes, you should. I set that up because I was assuming you know. Since
I am the boxing expert. It's on HBO.
It's on HBO. All right, so
he's
there you go.
Because
and you can get HBO without cable these days, so even better. All right, so Zane and I, however, will be doing the 6th round after the fight, right, Zane?
Yeah.
All right. See,
betting picks. Can I do my betting picks?
Yep.
Before we close out.
Yeah, do them.
I think Rawlings at -162, solid pick. I really think she's kind of a lock to win that fight. Your underdog chance bet of the card is absolutely Daniel Kelly at +300. That's outrageous for what a close competitive fight that is with Sam Alvey. So yeah, certainly put a couple pennies on Daniel Kelly and go buy yourself a drink afterwards. Webb at -102 is a hell of a good bet. That's like even money for a guy who I consider to be a heavy favorite to win that fight. And I think Brad Tavares at -170 is pretty solid too. It's kind of base that one on your own estimation if you decide to bet on that one. But certainly if you're like playing, actually no, if you're playing counter move, don't go with Brad Tavares because he's not going to land enough punches to get you points. But if you're got a little extra spending money, I think Tavares is only at such a low price as a favorite because of his recent struggles, not because he doesn't deserve better odds.
All right, and that Is that our show? Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody? Anybody?
Any of the other many people here?
Yeah, we got 25 viewers here. This is it's one of our biggest shows of all time.
Why?
People are.
Because people want to know what they're not going to be watching. That's why.
Yeah, probably so. But again, like the last 3 fights of the Fight Pass card are more or less of interest. So
Yeah. If you're still up after Canelo Kirkland, hop over to Fight Pass and watch the last 3 fights.
And then you've got all day Sunday as well. If you got Fight Pass, watch at your leisure. You can fast forward through the boring parts and skip the fights that you already heard sucked. So join us on Saturday night for the 6th round. Connor will have all the boxing coverage at Bad Left Hook, and we'll have some boxing coverage at BloodyElbow.com as well. Follow us on Twitter at TheBoxingBush, BUSCH.
There will also be a boxing preview, another figuring out the fight for Canelo Kirkland coming later today.
Excellent.
Bad Left Hook.
Awesome. And Zane, you can follow at TheZaneSimon. You can follow me at KidNate. Follow Bloody Elbow at Bloody Elbow. Read us on BloodyElbow.com and BadLeftHook.com. Subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube, and that's DOTCOM spelled out because we are idiots and didn't get to the MMA Nation name on YouTube. Give us a like, and adios MMA aficionados. We'll see you next time.